So our guest today is Tanner Hackett, CEO and founder of Counterpart. They focus on agentic AI for insurance. So really they're rethinking risk. He talks a little bit about his mentors, his shift from HR tech to insurance, talks a little bit about what Counterpart does and how risk management and the ethical side of AI are super important. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, it's Alec Crawford, your host for the AI Risk Reward podcast. And our special guest today is Tanner Hackett, CEO and founder of Counterpart. Welcome, Tanner.
Thanks for having me, Alec.
Hey, this is going to be great because I've been thinking a lot about technology, AI agents, and obviously you're dealing with agentic insurance and how that's rewriting the rules for modern business at this point. That's pretty cool. But I like to kind of rewind time a little bit, go into your background and get some stories out of people. So let's hear about what first drew you to technology and entrepreneurship.
It's a super fun journey to get here. With the culmination of one, insurance, and that combined with AI. My background is in entrepreneurship, really started as in e-commerce. From there, I went into marketing technology and now in insurance. But there's a common thread in all of this, and it is using data to make better decisions. In e-commerce, you're using information about an individual and their purchasing behaviors to suggest different products or recommend how they can increase their basket size with the goal of maximizing profitability from every engagement with a customer. And in insurance, you're looking at, okay, let's use data about, in our case, a commercial business to determine what's that risk profile. What are the exposures the business faces? What's the probability of a claim and the severity of that claim? And so been able to apply lots of those skills, despite it being very different industries, to solving the problems that I find fascinating today of making insurance not only a tool to help to transfer risk, but proactively address risk.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense to me. And, as you move through your career, was there a specific mentor or anyone who helped shape your journey?
Oh, God, so many. I find that in my career, I've been so fortunate to be given opportunities to get a great education, opportunities to live in a variety of different places and test different careers. Even before being an entrepreneur, being in the private equity space, and then doing consulting. And I think this is kind of just the personality type is always questioning assumptions in each of these fields. And there's a lot of people that will just go with the flow. And I consider myself a bit of an agitator, and I've aligned myself with agitators, collection of interesting people asking interesting questions. That's the way I like to think of my friend group. And amongst those, it's people from so many different backgrounds. I think there's folks that have really leaned into technology and obviously, advocating for this future. I can remember one close mentor who, I think this was 2017. I was having a drink with them in New York, and they had mentioned this company called OpenAI. And this was very low profile now. And, he mentioned some of the people involved and the concepts that they were provoking here of how artificial intelligence, which was really fantasy in movies, could become a reality very soon. Using the examples of things like Minority Report as a representation of what would be possible in very short order. And to which, is largely dismissive, to be quite honest. It's just so fantastical to have these conversations in 2017 as we are still as an industry getting our data layer rights and our structuring of fields and parsing what should it live in the cloud or should we host it internally, and security risk. And now fast forward, 8-9 years later, and all of a sudden we've zoomed forward and this reality is staring us in the face. So fun to have folks like him as mentors. But I would argue, like, your mentorship, it comes from so many different places. Salespeople, what an incredible attribute, and what an important thing to layer into every career. Whether you're an engineer or whether you are a CEO, the ability to articulate, well, one is to be empathetic and have a perspective on what motivates that counterpart that you're trying to deal with, and then be able to articulate that value proposition in a way that resonates with that individual. It's a skill that I give a lot of credit to my co-founder of my previous company called Button, Mike Ciccone. He was the best salesperson I've ever met before. And even as you move into new roles and responsibilities, it's a toolkit that I continue to redeploy, whether I'm talking to a product manager or talking to operations or salespeople themselves.
Yeah, super cool. No, I agree with that. I think that if you could take everybody coming out of school, no matter how geeky they are, and just go just do a sales job for 2 years, their careers ultimately will do better for that. You're always selling something to someone. If it's not a customer, that's your boss or your peers, right?
And as a subject that I think you can practice at home, there's just study psychology, human psychology. Like that's the origins of sales, and understanding people's interests. How do you align those interests? How do you communicate to them? It's a very powerful toolkit.
Yeah, very cool. So obviously you headed from your early career and more HR tech to insurance. Like, how did you end up insurance? Like that's and that really obviously dovetails into the origin story for Counterpart, right? So that could be really interesting.
So, yeah, Counterpart was, after building a few companies before, I kind of glossed over that, but built what is the largest e-commerce company in Southeast Asia. It's called Lazada, essentially an Amazon clone for Southeast Asia. We arrived there in 2012, and they didn't have, it was all mall-based culture. And so we built out the modern infrastructure for e-commerce, which they just skipped go past laptops and went straight to mobile. It was fun to be a part of that and seeding this market and enabling people to have access to the internet by selling $50 phones in Southeast Asia. And then to mobile marketing tech, where this was based in New York. A fun time to be a part of the New York tech community, which our investors questioned why we would build a technology company outside of San Francisco at that time. It was so controversial to do so. It's fun. I was just in New York last week talking to entrepreneurs, and it is ripping in New York. It's a very dynamic market to be in. They've moved beyond fintech. A lot of exciting developments coming from some incredible entrepreneurs out there. But then I pivoted into what was originally Counterpart's business model of HR tech, because I just knew how hard it was to create companies. The success of my previous businesses is a function of, one, luck. Let's recognize that. But two, investing in the right infrastructure at the right time to help to create a foundation of, you put a great product and idea into it and it can excel. And I think it's really hard for any first-time entrepreneur especially, but really any entrepreneur at any time they go about it, to determine what's the right time to invest in my recruiting systems and my software and employee feedback, my management training, learning development. it's something we juggle with, and it's always on our list, but we never are able to bump it to the top because there's always, cash flow, revenue concerns. There's always something that steps ahead of it. And so Counterpart was originally designed to try and democratize that, to give access to these tools where it's almost a la carte. And this was before the big, HR tech boom. And people didn't necessarily see the value in it, understandably. So I went to all my friends and nobody purchased it. But in having these conversations with our original MVP, I realized, well, what happens if you don't do this well? One is the business fails, or two, you have litigation, and maybe both. And that's what led me down the path of insurance. Insurance is the risk transfer of these exposures, whether this is litigation from shareholders, whether this is from negligence, whether this is wrongful termination from having to lay people off. All sorts of stuff happens if you're not making these investments. And we went through this process of trying to then unpack what is insurance. Like, why have I been paying $50,000, $30,000 in premium for the coverages that basically, I gloss over and jam into a file cabinet and don't revisit for another year. And it's fun to talk to you about AI and its value in this product line, in this industry, which has been, holy moly, it is so antiquated. It is so backwards for what I would consider it's a data industry, right? This is all you do is deal with data and insurance. So it's a lot to dig into in that respect.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've got a story there where, we've been talking to cyber insurance companies, right? Hey, my company does cybersecurity, right? And the question was, hey, do you think a company could get a discount on their cyber policy if they're using certain cybersecurity software, especially around AI, right? And the answer was, we're not even asking the question on the form yet if our companies are using AI. Like, that's how far behind they are. They're literally not asking the question, let alone asking the question, well, what kind of AI? Is it internal? Is it customer facing? Like, it's just kind of mind-boggling to me that they haven't kind of caught up. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is obviously part of what Counterpart is doing, where you're using agentic AI to do all kinds of cool stuff. So give us an example of the kind of agentic AI that you've developed that is helping your customers.
Yeah. So when you think about insurance, what people are most familiar with is the purchase experience. And that is nobody is going to raise their hand and be like, oh, I loved it. It was fantastic. It was so easy. It's just so many back and forth and document uploads, and you go into a black box and all of a sudden you get a number back and it's like, I owe $14,000. Great. Again, no idea what the coverages are. And so when I think about agentic and applications in any case, let alone insurance, it's about, okay, how do we create transparency into these workflows through trying to structure data better, and how do we improve the response time and ultimately, the quality of that response. And there is a lot of complexity to insurance. I don't want to dismiss it, but it is rocket science. It is not rocket science. As I pointed out earlier, we're data companies. So it's about, how do you ingest this information? How do you use third-party data to try and get to a confidence interval on the data that you're not getting, so you don't have to go back and forth? And then how do you, represent a quote that is consumable to them so they can make a quick decision and not have to go back and forth on your broker? Is this a good quote or not? That is agentic, right? It's like, okay, submit information, get back to you shortly with the full quote with all the context necessary for you to just go about your life. And wow. We've done this, I think, better than anybody in what are pretty meaningful exposures. Like, these are if you get sued for harassment, discrimination, negligence, wrongful termination, it can be existential. Like it's lights out to a company. We're talking several hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars of exposure, especially in today's litigious environment. And so these are very important decisioning that we have to make up front, and it is complicated, but that's not where it stops. Then you're on the risk. Then we're on the risk for 12 months of a policy term. Well, surely you want to apply the same methodology to help the business be a better risk during that 12 months. And so how do you re-underwrite this business on a reoccurring basis to say, hey, there's a new exposure in Washington where all of a sudden, if you do not disclose the salary for this job, every applicant, you need to pay up to $2,500. Well, there's attorneys out there that are now bringing together their friends and applying to these businesses and saying, hey, here's the number of applications we had. I don't see a salary for this. You owe us $20,000, $50,000, $100,000. Well, you do this enough times. One, it's a great business, and two, this is a lot of companies that are going to have to close up shop because of this new legislation. We have this data, right? We're an insurance company that's on this risk. We want to proactively engage with this business and let them know about their exposures, not just wait till the next renewal and say, oh yeah, you guys don't get insurance because you didn't address this exposure. And that's another peg to the Agentic platform. It is being able to advocate for improvements in the posture of these businesses to a very dynamic operating environment, both from a legislative perspective, but also, from tariffs, from supply constraints, from inflation. How do we advise them and to how to proactively address these exposures? Which ultimately, if a business is dealing with financial pressures, they're more likely to make mistakes, like lay people off without thinking about the terms and conditions to do it humanely. So the final piece is, say a claim happens, which we're humans and we make mistakes, and this is why insurance exists. Well, you have a plaintiff's bar that I'm sure you've talked to some of these very sophisticated engineers that are now equipping the plaintiff's bar with a lot of data to go and just pepper businesses and individuals with lawsuits, right? You can't drive in on a freeway without seeing some advertisement for an attorney that is looking for any wedge for them to show out, start tort litigation against a rideshare company, a automotive company, like you can name it, and just any business with pockets. And so you have this arms race with a plaintiff's bar that has a ton of tools and data that is ready to go into the deep pockets of businesses. And that's where insurance companies, I think, have an obligation to build up the resources to go protect these companies when a claim occurs. And that takes understanding the nature of the claim, the plaintiff attorney themselves, the jurisdiction it's in order to model out what's the optimal outcome for this claim, to come up with a strategy to defend the insured, and is while also ensuring that the plaintiff is paid out fairly without coating the pockets of the plaintiff attorney. So lots to unpack there, but you can see just the layers to insurance. This is not one problem that can be solved. It needs to be looked at holistically.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And look, we're about risks of AI as well as benefits of AI. So we've heard kind of about some of the benefits. What about some of the risks? What about, AI agents gone wrong in this role or something like that? How do you think about that? What have you seen in the past that's been like, whoa, like something bad happens? Any good stories there?
Yeah, I would say from an industry perspective, there's the holy grail that everybody's working towards is automated decisioning. But simultaneously, we talked about how broad these exposures are. And we're talking about millions, tens of millions in verdicts that can come from a poorly written policy contract. And so I think there have been some, on occasion, new tech startups come and say, yeah, we're going to automate the whole thing. I don't know a single one of those that's worked out well.
Yeah.
I don't know a single one that said, we'll just black box underwrite this. And it usually takes a few years for these development patterns to come back and be like, you missed a trend. And all of a sudden we're on these carriers are on the hook for some very meaningful losses. And so I think what Counterpart has figured out is that the optimal relationship between technology always involves a subject matter expert, be it an underwriter, and we call them risk engineers, because they're providing that human in the loop, that interpretation of these very unique exposures that require human intuition. I could look at, you have two restaurants, they're right across the street from each other. Same zip code, roughly the same size, roughly the same revenue. A model might predict actually very different exposures to these businesses based on third-party data. Our human needs to understand what is unique about this rating so we can recalibrate the model for the future risk that comes in. And it is becoming the architect for the product versus architect for the portfolio versus architect for the risk. In a traditional insurance carrier, for instance, you would have an underwriter look at every single individual risk and underwrite the whole thing in its entirety. We're just looking at what's the asymmetric part of that, and how does a human move out the edges of the underwriting to address this novel exposure. So the next one to come in, we catch as well.
Now, that sounds very cool. Look, you've done a bunch of stuff. Obviously, you've been there since the start at Counterpart. So shifting to more our advice section here, having seen this movie before and done multiple startups, how about some pieces of advice for kind of early startup founders there?
Just know what you're signing up for. In all honesty, like, it is so hard. It is so hard to build. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So as you're making that decision, as you're in that decision, appreciate that everybody's going through the same thing as you, to create something that they think creates value. I actually listened to this podcast with Lucky Palmer, who he's a CEO of Andrew, and he said it so well, which is, I could probably create a business that builds robots and, create something like Boston Dynamic or DJI. He could do that pretty easily, but he wants to do the hard thing. He wants to do the hard thing that very few other people can do, because they're all hard. It's just like this scale of difficulty. But he wants to really be aspirational and create something that truly is unique, creates true value, and is worth his time. So if you're going to go through the pain, aim high, or like really acknowledge that this is part of the journey, and take solace in the fact that the time and pain that you're putting in is yielding some positive benefit for society in the long term.
And now a word from our sponsor. Artificial Intelligence Risk Inc. accelerates adoption of GenAI safely. They provide the governance, risk, compliance, and cybersecurity platform that financial, healthcare, and other regulated organizations need before they can use GenAI safely and in compliance with regulatory requirements. Their software has won #1 awards for cybersecurity and compliance from Waters Technology. Find them at aicrisk.com. That totally makes sense. Now, in terms of news about AI, insurance, agentic AI, risks of AI, are there any particular blogs or other sources out there, or even something in print that's valuable to you that you can recommend?
Yeah, it is so hard to keep pace with all the change, and there's actually two podcasts I'd probably recommend. One is called the AI Daily Brief. Have you listened to this one at all, Alec?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it can be helpful. Absolutely.
And then another one is Limitless. Any familiarity with that one?
Yeah, I've listened to that as well. Yeah, that's it's a little bit longer than the Daily Brief, shall we say?
Yeah, they go into more depth. Honestly, I feel like if I miss 2 days, the world has passed me by. That is the pace of innovation is so stimulating and so fun. And it's just thought provoking. I think it challenges us. I think Counterpart is ahead of the curve quite substantially in terms of our utilization of AI, but it is motivating to listen to these, and you need to increase the velocity at which you're deploying AI. You cannot even the moment you've become comfortable, it creates a window of opportunity for somebody to pass you by, because that arc of acceleration for everybody else, it's just the bar's moving lower on how you can apply this in organizations.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I was at an MIT conference. I was speaking at the conference, and then I obviously went to see some other sessions, and there were a couple of pretty famous names up on stage, and they're basically agreeing with each other. This is about a year ago, that if you took a weekend off, you fell behind. So literally saying like you had to work every weekend to keep up, which I think remains true today. And then, turning to kind of philosophical questions about AI. Look, AI ethics is such a complex topic. Like, we're talking about insurance, right? Like, and obviously you've got all kinds of things there around ethics in terms of underwriting. A great example in the past has been, hey, conditions already that the insurance company's aware of, like pre-existing conditions, or, hey, what about, if you sequence your genome and discover some kind of predisposition for something. That's obviously more on the life insurance side, but what kind of ethical challenges have you run into, and how have you addressed them?
I think it's still the tip of the iceberg for us. We are working with commercial businesses, so we don't have the same challenges that I think personal lines insurance. There's got to be some really deep conversations. If you're working on personal lines, automotive, home, health, I mean, this is not only dealing with PII, but decisioning that affects individuals in truly significant ways. On the commercial side, it's much more nuanced. Like, to my point earlier, there has to be a human in the loop to interpret this data. I don't think that it has the same life or death implications as the personal lines, but at the same time, I think that as an industry, we are still operating on, that DOS model of our data architecture, on our regulatory frameworks. And I think as a product of that, the customer is getting an inferior product. Like, I think there's lots of inefficiency, and I think it's less about the ethical conversation as it is change management conversation in institutions and organizations that have done it with this DOS methodology and are still doing it that way, and are about to have this reconciliation with the lack of investment that they've made in the last few years, which will lead to pretty significant layoffs in larger insurance companies. And that's what I'm trying to broadcast, is how do we do this humanely, where Chubb is saying, even recently, they expect 20% layoffs of their company, or 20% fewer people of their company in the future as AI becomes more integrated into their workflows. So what does that mean? Does that mean you're is this going to be a broad 20% across the industry? Are there new jobs that are being created? Are it feels like right now it's seen as a cost savings tool. I think there's other applications personally than cost savings, but I think that's a conversation we need to get ahead of, not just in insurance, but all industries that have this more antiquated framework that ultimately are going to operate much more efficiently post AI.
Yeah. Have you heard from anyone about what the regulators are doing around AI and insurance at this point?
Yeah, regulation is still very much focused on personal insurance, as it should be. I think I live in Los Angeles. I'm right now about a half a mile away from Pacific Palisades and the area that was affected by the fire earlier this year. I'm watching this push and pull between insurance carriers that are screaming that they need more rate in a market, and quantitatively, the models show that this is a high rate environment, while regulators are saying, hey, you can't increase the rates because it's unfair practice. I think these are more of the conversations, which is what's going to break a model and, the concerns of a private industry that can just opt out and say, we don't want to participate in this market anymore if it's going to be boxed in by these regulatory frameworks and you can't seek a profit. That's more of the conversation, to be quite honest. It's not about what data can be used and how it can be used, but how do you operate? How do you educate a regulatory body that has just operated a more lethargic, slower pace, understandably, because this industry has a lot of externalities. And how do you educate them on what the models are saying in this new world?
Yeah, very cool. Look, we're gonna pivot to our lightning round. We're gonna mention certain things and ask if you think they're underrated or overrated, and you can give me a sentence why. So we'll kick it off with New Zealand's technology community, underrated or overrated?
Massively underrated. I'm a part of this group called EHF, Edmund Hillary Fellows, and I've had the great fortune of meeting some exceptional entrepreneurs from what is a very small country. And pound for pound, the level of entrepreneurship and intelligence there is just fascinating. I think as a product of being on a small island, though, they need to be pushed and nudged to think bigger. So I see an opportunity here for them as we continue to find as the work environment becomes more and more remote, for them to have a bigger footprint across the globe.
Yeah, very cool. Insurance as an industry for innovation, underrated or overrated?
Again, massively underrated. It's going to take a while. They're going to need a lot of prodding and nudging. There's going to have to be some antagonists. I think Counterpart is one of those antagonists, showing them what's possible. But ultimately, as I mentioned before, I think we can move beyond this tax of pay us annually to, here's how insurance can help businesses be better. Here's how we can help individuals be healthier. Here's how we can protect homes. Here's how we can protect you on the roads. There's some very smart people thinking about this problem, but there's going to be a long arc to that change.
All right. raising capital early as a startup instead of bootstrapping. We're talking, 10 or 20% of value there. Underrated or overrated?
Very industry specific. If at all possible, if at all possible, obviously bootstrap. But if you're going to go into industries like insurance, highly capital intensive businesses, it is underrated. Like you just need to get the product out there as quickly as possible. And that requires meaningful capital for you to, it requires that you have a meaningful balance sheet for you to have the credibility to do so. Like no one's gonna trust you with their balance sheet if they don't know you have a balance sheet and some skin in the game.
Yep. LA Lakers chances this year, underrated or overrated?
I feel like they're already hyped, so it really depends on what your bar is. But I love the attitude for them, so I would say underrated. I love the attitude they bring. I still think everybody's in NFL mode, so they're not thinking about how unique the Lakers are. So underrated.
Rapid product launch cycles, underrated or overrated?
This is everything. I think it's already very rated. But this is how we operate. Even with AI, we have POCs. It's every 2 weeks. I want something out into the market, us testing, learning, iterating. I like whatever your PM or engineer is saying is to the complexity, ask the why question 3 times and force them to come up with something that can be delivered on a 2-week cycle. It's just going to help you move so much faster.
Personal branding for founders, underrated or overrated?
I'm probably not the right person to ask because I'm very poor at this, but I would. Everybody tells me it's underrated, so I'm going to go with the common knowledge on this. But I've had some success and I don't have any personal brand, so I can also make an argument that it's overrated.
Startup fundraising events, underrated or overrated?
Events related to fundraising?
Like a fundraising pitch at YC or at South by Southwest or whatever, that kind of event.
Can't say, never done it, but yeah, these are very personal things. So it feels like that's a lot of noise. I think a one-on-one is the answer to most of those types of questions, whether it's sales. This goes back to the sales question. It's tough to get a read on an audience if you're standing on stage. Who you actually selling to? I would say only as an introduction to a follow-up conversation where you can get them one-on-one.
And finally, the movie Lord of the Rings, or the trilogy, really, underrated or overrated?
I mean, underrated. This should be a required watch for all generations to come. What a fantastic narrative. So many different plot lines, so many different characters. You learn about different psychology, human behavior. Yeah, there's a lot of richness to that story.
Wow, that's awesome. Now, have you made friends with any famous movie people in LA yet, Tanner? Or?
Due to being a founder, I don't have much free time, so I haven't been able to make an impression yet.
All right. Well, maybe someday they'll make a movie about your life. You just never know, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been Tanner Hackett, CEO and founder of Counterpart. This has been a blast. Tanner, can you tell the audience where to find you?
Yeah, we're at yourcounterpart.com. We are a management and professional liability insurtech. And one thing we didn't talk about is being a completely remote company. So we're distributing across the U.S. and there's some fun benefits to doing so.
Yeah, you got to get everybody together at some point, right? Hey, let's
Indeed.
go get a drink at the Ivy or something, right? And fly people in.
Yes. I love you're Alec, you're a classy man. I'm more of a bar down the street.
Well, if you're going to make them fly in, you already paid a lot of money. You might as well get drinks at the Ivy, right? Like,
True. And they deserve it. We have a fantastic team here.
yeah. Excellent. Well, Tanner, thanks for having me on the show. This has been awesome. You're welcome back anytime.
Thanks for having me out.
You are listening to the AI Risk Reward Podcast with your host, Alec Crawford. You can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, for example, Apple Podcasts. Production and sound engineering by Troutman Street Audio. You can find them on LinkedIn. Please like, subscribe, and comment.